How's it going today, guys? Today is going to be a very interesting video since it's going to be talking about the data mining leaks as well as potential DLC for Devil May Cry 5. I will say though, before we actually get into this video, if you have not beaten Devil May Cry 5, you should probably click off of this video and complete that game first before you continue watching, as it might contain spoilers to the ending as well as other aspects of Devil May Cry 5. But that being said, let's get right into it. So the first thing that I want to talk about is actually the rumor for the DLC chapter on Lady, Trish, and Lucia. Now, this isn't confirmed in any way, so take this with a huge grain of salt. But supposedly the rumor goes that there's going to be a post-game DLC chapter focusing on the job that Morrison gives to Lady and Trish, and it will feature Lucia. Now, if this were to be a legitimate rumor, or if it turned out to be a legitimate thing where Capcom does come out and announce this DLC, and let's just say the name might not be accurate, but the content of the DLC and what the rumor is talking about does happen to be true, I would find that very interesting, because one thing that I have noticed, and even I have requested something like this, was I would really like to see Lucia be playable, and I know that there's a lot of people within the community that would really love to see Lucia get a second shot in a Devil May Cry game and see her combat be revised, and also for her character to be expanded upon in a more modern Devil May Cry game with better development time and better resources, etc., etc., etc. Because realistically speaking, she did get shafted in Devil May Cry 2, and it's really unfortunate that we haven't seen her since that game. So seeing her return for Devil May Cry 5 poses a lot of questions as to how she'll play, what she'll sound like, what is she going to look like, etc., etc. But nonetheless, it's going to be very interesting if it does turn out to be true. As far as Trish and Lady are concerned, Trish, she has been playable in previous Devil May Cry games, and while I'm not entirely excited about playing as her once again, I'm not against her being playable because it is just another character. I just hope that they can expand on her combat and not make her so much of a Dante clone per se. And in Lady's case, I would really just hope for more expanded mechanics and stuff like that, because most of what she was like in DMC 4SE was just charge Kalina Ann and you'll win, and that was pretty much the case. And since she doesn't have a devil trigger per se, it's just grenade spam. So with Lady and Trish, if they can expand on the characters and make new mechanics around them and really delve into what their combat could be like in the future, then I'm definitely not against them being playable once again. Am I excited about them being playable? Not so much as I would be for Lucia DLC or even Virgil DLC, of course, but again, I'm not against them being playable. I just want to see them be expanded upon and reworked a little bit. Now, if they were to do a DLC for these three characters, if this rumor is true and if we can actually take it as a legitimate thing, where is this going to be set? Because the main game is set in Redgrave City, and chances are they could potentially set the game in Redgrave City again, or rather the DLC in Redgrave City, or they could have completely new locations and new environments, new enemy types exclusive to that DLC, and really just create a whole new story altogether. And that's what I would hope for, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen. After all, we've seen that happen before with the special editions of Devil May Cry 3 and 4, where they have a prologue and epilogue cutscene, but nothing really new about them when we got to play as Virgil, or in the case of DMC 4SE, Lady and Trish. There was really nothing expanded upon. So my hope for potential DLC like this is we get some new stuff like new environments, enemy types, movesets, etc., etc. Now, something that I actually forgot to mention is the potential for the cameo system to be expanded upon in the DLC if this DLC is legitimate. Because in the main game, there aren't so many opportunities to come across other players or even just the ghost data for the development team that's playing. I really think that there could be some more potential for having the characters cross over more often and being in the same room, fighting together or fighting potentially bosses together too. That would be really interesting. I think that there needs to be more expansion on the cameo system, and if the DLC can possibly take advantage of that, then that would be something that I would really like to see, because it's really underutilized in the main game. There could also be the potential of a co-op mode where you could actually invite your friend to join you on the mission, and I think that would be a more ideal way of approaching it. From what I've been hearing, there is a possibility that the Bloody Palace mode is going to have something similar to that, so maybe that could actually be implemented within the DLC. And like I said, I would really like that, because I think it's just more ideal of a system as opposed to just running into ghost data or running into a random player when you're setting the game to prioritize your friends over random players. But that being said, maybe that is something that we can see with potential DLC like that. So I'm not too familiar with everything about the data mining itself, and I'm not too knowledgeable on how data mining works per se, so feel free to correct me where I might be wrong or might not be knowledgeable in this particular subject. But that being said, from what I remember of the image that's been floating around on the internet, there's apparently listings of specific moves that Virgil has, and some of the ones that I particularly remember are there's a parry move, a guard move, as well as a teleportation move. And teleportation to me is obviously going to be tricking. It's obviously tricking. There's no other way of putting it. It's just the way that Virgil is. Virgil has Darkslayer style. He tricks to his enemies or teleports to his enemies. Therefore, teleporting is very obvious as to what it is. However, guarding and parrying does not necessarily click with me. It could be something completely new, or that could be just stuff that he has in his boss fight. I'm not sure, but in the case that they were to give Virgil new abilities or potentially even new styles and make him similar to Dante as far as the way that he works with his mechanics, while also making him feel unique and like his own character as he always has, I think that there could be something going for him if this is something they plan on expanding upon with potential Virgil DLC. I think that given that Virgil is a character that is pretty much always in high demand to be playable, now is a very great opportunity to have him released and not do another special edition. I'm not saying special edition cannot exist in the future. I do think that there's always room for a Devil May Cry special edition whenever they get a chance to do it, but I don't want the excuse for special edition to always be, hey, Virgil's now playable, because that's kind of the marketing strategy they use for both DMC3 and DMC4. Virgil's playable. And not that that was necessarily a bad thing, but it's going to take more than just making Virgil playable and having a prologue and epilogue cutscene to get people sold on getting a special edition again. I think in this case, if Virgil is going to be playable again, they need to make it DLC. And not only a DLC that is just him being playable from start to finish, but also one that gives him a new story with new cutscenes and actually progresses him as a character and overall just gives us something new with Virgil that doesn't go back on his past and doesn't really do much for the character per se as far as how to make them grow and progress. Now, that being said, I do think that there's a lot of story potential for Virgil to move forward in this game. I think that where they left off Devil May Cry 5 with Virgil and Dante leaves us some room to see where Virgil is going to go from here. I think that this would be a great opportunity to have both Dante and Virgil finally set aside their differences and show how powerful they can be when they work together. I do think that that would also leave room for more cameo system stuff. And there's also just the potential of giving both Dante and Virgil new weapons to work with as far as combo potential is concerned. My biggest complaint with Dante in Devil May Cry 5 is that a majority of his weapon loadout is just duplicate weapons, and while I was in favor of having legacy weapons, I was not in favor of them just mostly being duplicates. Duplicates being Rebellion, Sparta, and Devil Sword Dante, and the Kalina Ann variants. I like the fact that they are in the game, and I wouldn't take them out, but I don't like that you have 3 variations of both those swords and that cannon or rocket launcher, if you will. I think that with DLC they could potentially introduce legacy weapons, even though I know canonically speaking Dante has gotten rid of his previous weapons from past games. But they could rectify that and say that, well, since he's in hell, he might fight variations of bosses he's fought in previous Devil May Cry games. After all, he did fight a new variation of Cerberus and ended up getting a new weapon variation of Cerberus. So it's not too far-fetched if they wanted to revive stuff from like Devil May Cry 3 or potentially even Devil May Cry 4 and Devil May Cry 1. Same with Virgil. I think that if they wanted to give him Beowulf again, they could just introduce a new Beowulf for him to fight, and therefore he can rectify the loss of the original Beowulf. Now, the only issue from here, though, for Virgil is that he's not going to have Force Edge, or at least canonically speaking, he's not going to have Force Edge. He could have Force Edge in gameplay, and that's the same thing with like the Beowulf. He could have the original Beowulf just for gameplay purposes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's canonical. And in my personal opinion, I would actually prefer Virgil to get new weapons since it's been so long since the events of Devil May Cry 3 and Devil May Cry 1. I do think that since he's now alive and well, he needs to grow as far as a character is concerned and receive new devil arms. I do think that there is potential for him to get something completely new that's far-fetched from, or not far-fetched, but much different from using Yamato and Force Edge, but I don't know if that would be necessarily the best idea or if it would work well. But I am open to the idea of him getting something completely new that's that strays away from the traditional weapon setup that Virgil is known to have in previous Devil May Cry games. Now, something I do want to note is that modders have gotten Virgil to actually work. They are working on something for him to become playable via mods, and that's very interesting to see. So there is that very big potential that Capcom might be planning on using Virgil for future DLC, which I really hope so. I mean, if modders can get him to work fairly well, then I think Capcom could do an even better job. And personally, I would love to see some official Virgil DLC alongside the previous DLC that we had talked about. Now, before I end the video, I do want to talk about just some of the personal DLC that I would like to see. So one of the few things that I think some people would definitely agree with me on here is legacy costumes. I would like to see both Nero and Dante get their classic costumes. And granted, I don't want it to just be Devil May Cry 3 Dante or Devil May Cry 1 Dante. I do think that if we're going to get classic costumes for Dante in particular, he should get his Devil May Cry 2 and Devil May Cry 4 looks if possible. And if I'm not mistaken, the coats for both Devil May Cry 3 and Devil May Cry 4 are things that they've made in the past, so it's not like it would be too impossible to scan them for the RE engine, and I'm pretty certain that they could probably do something with Devil May Cry 2's costume. I would love to see Devil May Cry 2 Dante be an actual costume to use in the main game, or even in DLC featuring Dante and Virgil. For Nero, I do think that his classic DMC4 look as well as his prototype look should make a return. If they have any other potential prototype looks that they may have scrapped from Devil May Cry 4 or even Devil May Cry 5, I would definitely like to see what they would have for Nero. I think Nero should have stuff that was mostly like prototype stuff that they've never really shown to the public before, or only shown in the artworks for Devil May Cry 4 and Devil May Cry 5 for stuff that they haven't shown off, at least. I would not mind more costumes for V, although I think that if they're going to do costumes for V, they should be very unique and very interesting. I don't want them to be too reminiscent to Virgil, given the fact that V and Virgil are one and the same. I don't mind if they bring in other costumes for like Nico, Lady, and Trish, although in the case of Lady and Trish, I do hope that they can make them very unique, especially if the whole rumor about them having a playable DLC with Lucia is true. I do think that they should really stand out from the typical stuff that they get. Mostly Trish, though, in this case, because Trish has been wearing the same outfit for 5 games, minus Devil May Cry 3, of course, but for 4 games at this point. Other DLC aside from costumes, personally, I would like to see Dante get legacy weapons again. I know I've said that before. I do think that Dante does need other things besides what he has, because it does feel very limited. And if I'm not mistaken, I haven't unlocked this yet, but if I'm not mistaken, you can literally equip up to 7 or 8 weapons on Dante, both firearms and devil arms, and I think it would make sense to include new devil arms and firearms, even if they are not canonical for him to have anymore, or just in general new stuff that he hasn't used before, just to make that unlock of having more than the basic for devil arms and firearms to feel a little bit more unique than just here's a bunch of duplicates of weapons you already have and have used in different forms. Nero, I would like to see him get new Devil Breakers, mostly stuff that would be like a crossover of other Capcom titles, like maybe he could get a Monster Hunter Devil Breaker and an Onimusha Devil Breaker that's based off the Oni Gauntlet, stuff like that. I just think that there's a lot of room for more crossover stuff for Nero in particular. V, I don't know if they would ever do anything like weapon-wise or anything like that, considering the fact that all of his familiars cannot be swapped out or anything, unless if they want to swap out Nightmare for like Phantom, which I think would be really interesting if they could do that, but I really doubt they would do something like that. Outside of that, maybe multiple soundtrack releases. Like, there are some tracks that I think they are missing out on releasing for you to like swap out, especially like for bosses. I would like to see swappable boss soundtracks, because I am not a big fan of King Cerberus's theme. I would really like to swap that out for like the original Cerberus theme, or maybe like a the HRHM remix of that theme that they released a few years back. And I know some people were even asking for some of the tracks from the Devil May Cry anime to be listed into the jukebox. So I think there is that room for stuff like that. I think they should implement stuff like that. But outside of that, that's pretty much what I would like to see. I think that aside from story DLC, which is probably going to be the top priority over everything else, minor stuff that I would personally like to see. That's stuff that I would like to see. But I am interested to know, like, what would be some minor stuff you guys would want to see that they don't have in Devil May Cry 5 that you wouldn't mind seeing as maybe like cheap DLC or free DLC that you can get within Devil May Cry 5. And on top of that, what do you think on the rumors for the Trish Lady and Lucia DLC and the possibility of Virgil becoming a future playable character in Devil May Cry 5? Let me know down in the comment section below. This has been another video from myself, BioDevilDom. I will see you all in the next one. Bye.